1.3 million? That is how many Russian soldiers have been killed or seriously wounded in Ukraine? 1.3 million? Not a projection. Not an estimate designed to embarrass Moscow. The cumulative casualty count of a military that invaded a smaller neighbor expecting victory in days, and has instead spent 4 years being ground down by a country it was supposed to overwhelm in a week. 1.3 million soldiers. Gone. For a war Russia has not won. Against an opponent Russia was not supposed to be able to lose to. Every nation that Russia has been courting as a weapons customer, every Gulf state that Moscow was positioning itself to supply, every developing world government that Putin has been presenting Russian arms as the sovereign, no-strings alternative to Western military dependency, all of them can see that number. All of them can do the arithmetic. And the arithmetic tells them something that Putin's salesmen cannot talk their way around. If Russian weapons and Russian military doctrine cannot defeat Ukraine, they will not defeat their enemies either. That realization was already costing Russia before Operation Epic Fury began. Russian arms exports had already collapsed 64% over 5 years. The European Union was already selling 4 times as many weapons as Russia across the same period. The paper tiger that Russia had been presenting as a great military power was being exposed in real time in Ukraine for every potential customer to study. And then Iran fired its Shaheds at the Gulf states that Russia was trying to court. And a country that Russia has been trying to erase for 4 years became the most sought-after defense partner in the Middle East. In this video, we are going to look at exactly how Russia's strategic partnership with Iran, the relationship Putin invested in as a cornerstone of his anti-Western coalition, became the single most catastrophic geopolitical error of his career. How Ukraine converted 4 years of surviving Russian and Iranian drone bombardment into decade-long defense contracts with Qatar, Saudi Arabia, and the United Arab Emirates. What it means that Ukraine is now actively deploying its interceptor technology in Gulf airspace against the same weapons Russia used to bombard Kyiv, and why every deal Ukraine signs, in the Gulf, in Europe, and beyond, removes another lever from Putin's hand at the precise moment he needs those levers most. But first, let us look at the relationship that destroyed Russia's Gulf strategy before a single Ukrainian expert set foot in Riyadh. Russia's investment in Iran was supposed to be a masterstroke of anti-Western coalition building. The logic was straightforward. Iran is a regional power with deep hostility toward the United States and its Gulf allies. Russia needs partners willing to operate outside the Western-led international order. Iran needs weapons, technology, and a great power patron to shield it from maximum economic pressure. The partnership is symbiotic. Russia provides diplomatic cover, technological assistance, and strategic alignment. Iran provides drones, specifically Shaheds, that Russia uses to bombard Ukrainian cities, reducing the rate at which Russia needs to expend its own more expensive munitions. Both nations benefit. Both nations are invested in the other's success. What the logic misses is the geography of the constituency Russia is trying to build. Russia's Gulf courtship is about replacing American military dominance in the Middle East with Russian influence. The Gulf states, Saudi Arabia, the United Arab Emirates, Qatar, Kuwait, are the pivot points of that strategy. If Russia can position itself as a credible alternative security partner for the wealthiest nations in the region, it gains influence, revenue, and the geopolitical validation of demonstrating that the American-led order is not the only order available. To win that courtship, Russia needs the Gulf states to feel secure in its partnership, safe, confident that aligning with Moscow does not expose them to threats that Moscow cannot or will not contain. Iran firing Shaheds at Gulf cities while Russia's strategic partnership with Tehran is in full effect destroys that confidence in the first week of Operation Epic Fury. Think about the position of a Gulf defense minister watching Iranian drone waves incoming, knowing that the drone Iran is using was provided to Russia by Iran, licensed to Russia by Iran, and used by Russia against Ukraine for 3 years, with Russian government approval. The weapon attacking his country is a product of the Russia-Iran partnership. The nation asking his government to consider Russian arms is the nation that enabled, supported, and collaborated with the regime, now burning Gulf infrastructure. How do you buy weapons from the partner of the country attacking you? You do not. And the drift toward Moscow that Putin spent years cultivating reverses overnight. The Gulf states need a defense partner that can stop Shaheds. Russia cannot stop Shaheds. Russia has been unable to stop the far less sophisticated anti-drone technology that Ukraine has deployed against Russian weapons for 4 years. Russia does not have a 90% Shahed interception rate. Russia does not have combat-tested low-cost interceptor technology that works at scale. Russia is a Shahed problem, not a Shahed solution. Ukraine is the solution, and Ukraine is ready to prove it. Until now, the world's largest economies in the Gulf had no particular reason to look at Ukraine as anything more than a brave nation fighting a desperate war. Until now, Ukraine's claim to the Gulf states' attention is not diplomatic. It is the 90% interception rate achieved against Russia's Shahed-type drones in March of 2026. That number, 9 out of 10 drones destroyed before reaching their targets, is not a laboratory result. It is a live combat result, validated against a real adversary improving its countermeasures in real time, achieved at a cost per interception so favorable that it makes the traditional surface-to-air missile defense model look economically absurd. Here is what that cost model means in practice. A Russian Shahed costs between $20,000 and $50,000 to produce and deliver. A Patriot interceptor missile costs over $3 million. Using a Patriot to shoot down a Shahed is like deploying a Formula One car to deliver a pizza. Technically it works, but the economics are unsustainable at scale. Russia understood this when it designed the Shahed campaign. The goal was to force Ukraine to use expensive interceptors against cheap drones until the interceptors ran out and the drones got through. The economics of exhaustion as a military strategy. Ukraine solved this by refusing to play the game on Russia's terms. It built its own interceptors, small, cheap, combat-tuned drones that hunt Shaheds for a fraction of the cost of the Shaheds themselves. It built layered electronic warfare that jams drone navigation before they reach defended zones. It built a multi-tier interception architecture that preserves the expensive missiles for genuine high-value threats, while cheap interceptors handle the drone waves. And it built this entire system in 4 years of live combat, refining every component against an adversary that kept making the Shahed harder to kill. The 90% interception rate is the output of that refinement. It is the most battle-tested anti-drone performance record of any nation on Earth. The Gulf states hit by Iranian Shaheds do not need a briefing paper on this. They need the system, and Zelensky moves to deliver it before anyone else can. The Middle East tour that follows Operation Epic Fury's opening weeks is executed with the precision of a country that understands exactly what it has, exactly what its partners need, and exactly how much time it has before the moment passes. 3 decade-long defense deals: Qatar, Saudi Arabia, the United Arab Emirates. 10 years of drone supply and air defense partnership with nations whose combined financial resources dwarf anything Ukraine has ever negotiated with. Ukraine does not just close these deals. It closes them before any other nation even frames the pitch. By mid-March, 200 Ukrainian military experts are in the Gulf, not advising, setting up, building the interception networks, installing the systems, training the operators. By mid-April, those experts are in combat. Ukrainian operators, using Ukrainian interceptor technology, shooting down Iranian Shaheds in Gulf airspace on behalf of nations that were not thinking about Ukraine 2 months prior. This is not a training exercise. This is Ukraine doing in the Gulf what it has been doing in Ukraine, defeating Shaheds at scale, in real conditions, with real consequences for failure. The credential is the combat record. The combat record is 4 years deep, and no one else can match it. But Ukraine is not extracting only prestige from these relationships. It is extracting exactly what Russia tried to deny it through 4 winters of infrastructure strikes: energy. Russia's strategy during the winter of 2025-26 involves the systematic destruction of Ukrainian power infrastructure, substations, heating facilities, electrical transmission lines, designed to create a civilian energy crisis that breaks the public's will to continue. The logic is the economics of civilian suffering applied to a modern war. Freeze the population, darken the cities, make the cost of resistance so visceral and personal that political pressure from below forces negotiations on Russian terms. The Gulf deals neutralize this strategy at its source. Saudi Arabia and Qatar supply Ukraine with oil and diesel that flows through European refineries and arrives as military-grade fuel on the front. The energy that Russia destroys in Ukraine is replaced by Gulf supply that Russian missiles cannot reach. The lever that Moscow spent an entire winter pulling is pried from its hand by the same nations that Russia was trying to court. At the same time, Ukraine's offensive strikes against Russian energy infrastructure remove Putin's ability to use Russian energy as a buying tool elsewhere. 40% of Russia's Baltic Sea oil export capacity is struck out of commission. The oil revenue that funds the war subsidizes the economy and purchases allied loyalty from nations that need cheap energy shrinks. Russia cannot buy influence with oil it cannot export. It cannot sustain the economy that sustains the military that sustains the war. Energy leverage, one of Russia's most durable geopolitical instruments, is being dismantled simultaneously from two directions: Ukraine receiving Gulf supply and Ukraine destroying Russian export capacity. Both operations serve the same strategic objective: ensuring that Russia cannot use energy as a weapon against Ukraine or as a gift to potential allies. The European deals compound this. Germany trades hundreds of Patriot air defense missiles for access to Ukraine's battlefield data, the operational performance records of advanced weapon systems in live combat against Russian threats. Ukraine's battlefield is the only place on Earth where the performance characteristics of Western air defense systems against Russian hypersonic weapons, cruise missiles, and drone swarms can be measured in real conditions. That data is worth more to a Germany preparing its own defenses than any simulation, and Germany recognizes this explicitly in the terms of the agreement. Norway signs a defense partnership focused on Shahed drone intelligence. The Netherlands signs a drone production agreement with a joint manufacturing component. Ukraine approaches Turkey, a NATO member with complex historical alignment toward Moscow on specific weapon systems, signaling that Ukrainian diplomatic reach now extends into the ambiguous middle ground that even Washington struggles to fully navigate. Every deal creates a new stakeholder in Ukraine's survival. Every partner that depends on Ukrainian battlefield data, Ukrainian interceptor expertise, or Ukrainian drone production has a direct strategic interest in Ukraine remaining a functioning, independent state. Ukraine has turned the logic of dependency, which Russia has used for decades to maintain influence over smaller nations, into an instrument of its own security architecture. Here is where Putin's position at any negotiating table becomes untenable. The narrative that Russia has maintained throughout the war is built on a single premise: Ukraine is losing, the West is tiring, and the accumulation of Russian pressure will eventually force Kyiv to accept terms that formalize Russia's territorial gains. This narrative requires the world to believe that Ukraine is the supplicant, the nation that needs to be rescued, that depends on others' generosity, that lacks the independent capacity to sustain resistance without external charity. That narrative is now empirically false in a way that cannot be argued away. Ukraine is not a supplicant, it is a service provider, a country that other nations pay for access to its capabilities, a country that Gulf states with sovereign wealth funds measured in the trillions seek out as a defense partner, a country that Germany gives its most advanced air defense systems to in exchange for knowledge, a country that has signed more defense cooperation agreements in the past 2 months than in the entirety of its previous history as an independent state. When Putin's negotiators sit across from their Ukrainian counterparts and attempt to frame Ukraine as a weakened, isolated nation that should accept whatever Moscow is prepared to offer, the response is now backed by evidence that directly contradicts every claim. If Ukraine is losing, why are the Gulf states paying for a decade of its defense expertise? If Ukraine is isolated, why is Germany trading Patriot missiles for access to its battlefield intelligence? If Ukraine is running out of options, why does it have energy supply secured from partners Russia cannot threaten? Russia has no good answers to these questions. And the absence of good answers matters enormously when the audience is not just Kyiv, but every nation watching the negotiation dynamic, every country that is deciding, in real time, whether Russia remains a credible partner worth maintaining a relationship with. Russia's arms exports have collapsed 64% over 5 years. The European Union sells 4 times as many weapons as Russia across the same period. The military that Russia presents as a world-class force has burned through 1.3 million soldiers in 4 years without defeating Ukraine. The partnership Russia built with Iran has cost it the Gulf states it was courting, The energy leverage Russia relied on is being dismantled by Ukrainian strikes and Gulf supply simultaneously. The geopolitical architecture Putin spent decades constructing is not merely weakening, it is being replaced piece by piece by a Ukrainian architecture that did not exist 18 months ago. Russia planned for a world in which it was the indispensable partner and Ukraine was the desperate supplicant. Ukraine looked at that plan, spent 4 years building the credentials to dismantle it, and then used a war happening thousands of miles away to prove that the plan had been wrong from the beginning. 1.3 million soldiers. And Russia still cannot stop what Ukraine has become. If you found value in this, subscribe so you do not miss what comes next.